In the previous panels we noted that Rashi, in his commentary to the prohibition of V'lifnei iver lo titein michshol, moves away from the strict literal reading of this prohibition in favor of an interpretation in which the iver is a summa b'davar, one who is blind or unaware of certain situations, and the prohibition addresses the situation of giving advice that is inappropriate for that particular individual. The Rebbe justifies Rashi's position on the basis that a literal reading of V'lifnei iver, where one is prohibited from placing an obstruction that might cause injury to the blind individual, is covered by the situation of a bor that is recorded in Shmot 21. The position of Rashi is drawn from the Torah Kahanim. The Torah Kahanim provides 4 examples that can be read into the reworking of the V'lifnei iver prohibition. Rashi, it seems, rejects 3 of those examples, citing the 4th. That 4th example was giving advice such as Mechor Sadacha, sell your real estate, your farm, V'kach lecha chamor, and with the proceeds purchase a chamor, change your occupation. Advice such as this, according to Rashi, is addressed by the pasuk of V'lifnei iver lo titein michshol, which begs the question, if we are reinterpreting the michshol as something that could cause either physical or spiritual damage, why is this situation also not covered by the prohibition reflected in Shmot 21? This question will be addressed in part 3. Meanwhile, I shall bring part 2 to a conclusion with a closer look at an assertion that was made earlier regarding the 3 examples mentioned in the Torah Kahanim that come under the prohibition of a bor of Shmot 21. The assertion of the Rebbe was that if one is prohibited from causing an obstruction that leads to a physical and or monetary loss, then certainly one would be held accountable for facilitating a violation of Torah law, a spiritual obstruction, such as the example brought by the Torah Kohanim, causing a Nazir to consume wine during the period of Nazirut. The Rebbe provides a textual basis for this assertion, drawn from the incident of the Chet Eitz Hadat, as recorded in Parashat Bereshit, when Adam Harishon was confronted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as to why he violated the prohibition against eating the fruit of the Eitz Hadat. His response was that he was not aware that the food that he was provided with by his wife Chava was something that was prohibited. Ha'isha shenatata imadi, the wife that you, God, gave to be with me, hidnatna li min ha'etz, she was the one who provided me fruit from that prohibited tree, which I subsequently ate. In other words, a justifiable mistake. Chava, who knew that the fruit was prohibited, also shirked responsibility by claiming that Hanachash Hisiyani va'ochel. The word Hisiyani has a shoresh of nun shin aleph, to raise, to lift up, to proclaim, to carry. But there is one other translation of the nun shin aleph verb, and that is to deceive. The Nachash tricked me into consuming the fruit that was otherwise forbidden. There is a great deal of midrashic activity that fill in the missing pieces to the narrative. Clearly from the text, however one understands what this Nachash was, whether a spiritual force controlling, communicating through an animal, similar to the donkey of Bilam, or whether the Nachash was a creature that had intelligence and could communicate with human beings, is at this point of time immaterial. As one reads the narrative, the Nachash was not challenged by God as to why he set in motion these unfortunate events. What we do have in the narrative is an interesting contrast in terms of consequences. Adam HaRishon was punished with banishment and galut from Gan Eden. Working backwards from the punishment meted out to each of the 3 protagonists, we can conclude that, firstly, whereas Adam in Gan Eden, he did not need to struggle to provide food, clothing, and shelter, from now on things would change. He, as the prototype of man, would need to struggle to provide food. Sometimes man was successful, at others not so. Chava's punishment was that when she began the process of birthing, that process would entail extreme pain. Also, she would forever be subservient to her husband. Fortunately, in the modern era, we have been able to alleviate both of the situations, pain management in the case of childbirth, and the ability of women to stand as equals in society. The Nachash was cursed. Arur ata mikol habehema, amongst all the animals of the world, umikol chayat hasadeh, and all the beasts of the field, you are to be cursed. And whereas up until this point in time, the Nachash was somewhat of an equal to Adam and Chava in terms of intelligence and communication skills, from now, al gechoncha telech, physically and metaphorically, your movement from point A to point B will be on your stomach. V'afra tochal kol yemei chayecha. You will eat the dust of the ground as long as you live, however one understands this decree. Of the three punishments, it would seem that meted out to the Nachash was the most severe, to which there's a rather interesting commentary that Rashi provides to the punishment meted out to the Nachash, a commentary drawn from Masechet Sanhedrin, that mikan, from here we see she'ein mahapachin, that we do not turn over. In other words, we do not scrutinize a case, referring to the situation where one is accused of a crime where guilt or innocence is decided by a panel of judges. This process of scrutiny is not undertaken bizchuto shel mesit, in order to find acquittal for one who has been accused of causing another to violate Torah law. The mesit is one who incites another to violate the laws of idolatry. This legal position, according to the Gemara in Sanhedrin and quoted by Rashi, is developed from the narrative dealing with the punishments meted out to the Nachash. We shall be taking a closer look at this source, quoted by Rashi from Masechet Sanhedrin. The upshot, in the words of the Rebbe, is that umizeh muvan, from here it can be seen, godel ha'isur, the severity of the prohibition, lahachshil et hazulat ba'avera, to cause one to violate Torah law, from which the Rebbe bases the assertion that if one is held accountable for causing physical and or financial damage to another, then certainly one would be held accountable for facilitating a violation of Torah law, and if, according to Rashi, the responsibility for creating that obstruction is included in Shmot 21, then certainly a spiritual obstruction, one that leads to a violation of Torah law, would come under the broad umbrella of bor. On this basis, argues the Rebbe, Rashi is justified in rejecting that third example recorded in the Torah Kahanim as an example to the expanded definition of the prohibition of velifnei iver lo titein michshol.